Tonight, a Politics Hub special. I spent the day with a man the polls tell us is on course to be the next Prime Minister. In an emotional and revealing interview, Sir Keir Starmer tells me about his childhood, how there wasn't much emotional space for him growing up, and how he wishes he'd addressed his relationship with his father before he died. The Labour leader and I spent the day at a school in Harlow. After privately educated stars dominated the UK's Oscar contingent, he tells me he wants more state school kids to succeed in the arts. And he also insists he is committed to properly funded public services despite the awful economic landscape he expects to inherit. But how? Also tonight, one of the Conservative Party's most prominent MPs from the 2019 intake, Lee Anderson, defects to Reform UK as one of the last pricks in the so-called Tory Red Wall just crumbled away. I'll be joined live by Vice Party Chair James Daly. And PR handouts, trusted sources, photoshops, how the cake photo is relevant to the world of Westminster. All that and more with Caroline Flint and Tim Montgomerie, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is a Politics Hub special. Hello, welcome to the Politics Hub. Now, I've interviewed Keir Starmer a lot over the last few years, but if I'm honest, I've always found him slightly impenetrable as a politician. What drives him? What's he passionate about? Why does he want to get into number 10? What will he do when he gets there? Today, though, when I spent the day with him, I found a side that I hadn't experienced before, and honestly, I feel like I got to understand him a bit better. He usually comes across as someone quite controlled, rigorously sticking to the line, very focused. But when I asked him about his relationship with his father and whether he showed him love as a child, he was momentarily knocked off balance. He was open in this part of the interview. Perhaps a little less open, though, when talking about how to solve the problem of the deep spending cuts currently slated for next year onwards. Is he really prepared to become the austerity Prime Minister? Well, tonight, on this Politics Hub special, we'll be focusing on the man who, by the end of the year, could be in number 10. We were at Perford Green Primary School in Harlow, an Essex constituency that Labour won in 1997, but then swung to the Conservatives in 2010, a bellwether that Starmer is keen to win back. He wanted to talk about the way art subjects are taught in schools and also levelling the gap between state and private. But as you'll see, we discussed a lot more as well. Thank you so much for inviting us along on your trip to the school. It's good to have you on the programme this evening. First things first, before we get on to talking about why we're here at the school, Lee Anderson, the Conservative MP, has today defected to Reform. What's your reaction to it?
Another day, another story about Tory division. And, you know, I think the bigger picture here is now you've got a government that is so distracted, it's divided, it's arguing amongst itself. Meanwhile, there's no proper governing going on. You know, there are people really struggling. There are schools that need attention. And all we're getting is more and more division within the Tory party. And this is symptomatic now of a government that's really run out of ideas, run out of road, and that's why we need change.
Should he call a by-election?
Well, look, I mean, in the end, that's a matter for him, but I think...
Well, it's not really fair on the voters, is it? They voted for a Conservative, now they've got some for Reform.
No, I get that argument. I think if you actually asked across the country people, they would not say, we want a by-election, they'd say, we want a general election. We've just had enough of all of them. This is not just about Lee Anderson. It's about 14 years of failure. I do think there's a profound sense now that so many people say we just need change, we need to move on from this. The Tories have failed. They can see the Labour Party has changed and that we've got a plan to change the country. And I think there's a lot of people that say, look, forget about Lee Anderson, let's have a general election. OK, well, that's a message loud and clear. We are here at a primary school in Harlow, and we're here because you want to talk about your policy to try and boost the arts in state schools. What's the idea and how are you going to do it? The idea is to ensure that children, here we're at a primary school, equally for secondary school, get the chance to learn about music, art, theatre, creative thinking, and that it's seen not just as a nice to have if there's a bit of extra time, but actually as a central part of their learning. And so this morning we've been watching children play music, And in that few minutes that we did that, it reaffirmed everything to me that matters, because it's about a love of music or art or drama, but it's much more than that. If you look at the eyes of the children this morning when they're playing music, they're looking up at their teacher, they're learning how to work with each other, they're communicating about what they're doing. These are skills that are more than just about learning music or art. They're the skills that in years to come will be vital for them as they go into whatever job they go into in business or whatever it may be.
Because you, of course, played a lot of music growing up, right?
I did play a lot of music, yes. 4 musical instruments when I was growing up, and went to the Guildhall School of Music as a junior exhibitionist. So for me, that's given me a lifelong love of music, but also it's turned me into an advocate for music and arts and culture, because I can see what pleasure it gives. This morning I asked some of those children, they're only primary school children, how do you feel? And they said, it makes me feel happy. One of them said it makes me feel calm. So that's the value in its own right. But I think for too long we've felt, firstly, it isn't really important. It is really important, because those skills are going to be hugely important. Lots of businesses say to me, lots of discussions with businesses, what are the skills that you need from young people coming to you? And they say to me, Keir, we can give them the technical skills. What we can't give them is the ability to work in a group, leadership, to speak for themselves.
So,
and that's what this gives.
So that's the argument for it. Looking at how you're going to do it, you want to change your curriculum, right? To sort of try and make schools be forced, if you like, to make sure they're offering the arts. But there's no money behind it. And I know reform is important, but also instruments cost money too. I mean, you play the flute. Flutes cost about 80 quid, don't they? How are schools going to afford this with their existing budgets?
Yeah, let me take that in 2 parts, obviously. Firstly, what we want to do is to make sure that music, art, drama are assessed properly. So they're part of the overall assessment. The fact that they're not at the moment means that too many schools don't do it. And therefore children never get the chance. Now, that can be changed straight away, and it doesn't cost any money. We do want a wider curriculum review to make sure that children are ready for the work they're actually going to do and for the life they're going to lead.
You say it doesn't cost money. If schools are not offering music now, they don't have the instruments, do they? They don't have the music teachers. So I'm not sure if that's true that it doesn't cost any money.
Well, the curriculum
might not cost much money, but if you want schools to be properly offering music, that does cost money.
No, that's a good challenge. What we're saying is you can change the assessment so that it's counted. That doesn't cost you any money. Drama, for example, again, wouldn't necessarily cost you very much money. Musical instruments, I accept, that is going to be some money. And therefore, at this school, I asked them this morning, anticipating this very question. And so they said some parents can afford it, and obviously that helps. The school helps with some of the musical instruments. And then they go to schemes outside the school to help with the funding. Is it a challenge? Yes, it's a challenge. Is that a good enough reason to say we're not even going to offer this to children? No, I don't think it is. We have to work with that.
We're in award season. It was the Oscars last night. When you look at Brits who were successful in the arts, they are still dominated, aren't they, by private school kids?
They are. Christopher Nolan, fantastic win last night. But I think statistically, only 60% of those that are winning awards are from state school, when, of course, we know that 94% of children, young people, go to state school. So there is still that work to do.
Does that matter?
I think it does matter. I've got no envy for those brilliant people who pick up the awards. That is fantastic, whichever background you have, whatever school you went to. But what that tells me is there's too many people who haven't been given that opportunity if only 60% are coming from state schools. I actually think it goes back to what I was saying about the teaching of it at schools. If you go to private school, you're likely to be getting your music and your drama. And this other thing that I think is very important, which is confident speaking. This happens at private schools, not at state schools, and this matters. So it's not a sort of an envy of those that are winning. I'm very glad to see people winning, but it is to provide a better opportunity for all children to have that chance to be the winner that they could very well be.
I just want to pick up what you're saying on envy there, because some people are listening to you, talking about, wealthy people going on to do well at the Oscars, looking at VAT on private schools, will say it is about class envy. I just wonder, is that a problem? Because if you think about it, right, if you're looking at the opportunities that some people have, which are more than the opportunities that others have, who could work really, really hard and never get that opportunity. It's right to feel a bit envious of that, isn't it? It is about envy, but if you want to change, if that's what makes you want to change things, isn't that OK?
I would say opportunity, not envy. It's about making sure that every child has the same chance to be in those awards, the same chance to have their talents nurtured. That isn't about envy. I perfectly well understand the aspiration that so many people have in sending their children to private school, and they may save very hard in order to afford to do so. But I equally believe very deeply that that aspiration is there in every single parent sending their children to a state school. I send my children to a state school, our local secondary schools. That aspiration is there. So it's not the emotion of envy, but it is a very deep emotion of
what emotion
saying
is it?
It's about aspiration.
That's not an emotion, though, is it? What emotion is it, do you think?
Well, I think aspiration is actually an emotion. It's about what drives you forward, what takes you to the place. What do you want for your children? What do you want them to have the opportunities? But it is also about, I suppose, the emotion would be pride in seeing, look, my own children growing up. The pride you have, which they're my pride and joy, every parent understands that. But here, I went round every single class, so all of the ages at this primary school, and the children were confident. They wanted to engage with me. That tells you something about the school that I think the school should be very, very proud of. But it's about opportunity that allows that pride to come out.
You talk about your sort of pride in your kids. And if I'm being honest, I've always found you slightly impenetrable as a politician, you know, trying to work out what it is that kind of gets you out of bed in the morning, what your vision is, what it is, you know, who is Keir Starmer, if you like. And I read the sort of recent book by your friend Tom Baldwin, and I just wonder, I feel like I got to know you a bit more, to be completely honest, after that. Reading about, you know, your mum, who was obviously very ill, but also your relationship with your father as well, who, I don't know if I feel like I'm overstepping slightly, but it didn't feel like he showed you that much love growing up?
Well, this is a difficult one. And what I would say is that you touch on my mum and my dad, and the two go together. My mum was very, very ill, and she needed somebody in her life who was totally committed to her and her health and would put her above everything else. And my dad did that. He would give up everything for my mum, sleeping at the hospital when she was at the hospital, never leaving her side, making sure that he understood the combination of every single drug she might need every day to make sure it could never possibly go wrong, what to happen in certain symptoms. As a result of which, I suppose the emotional space was more squeezed than it might otherwise have been, and therefore, you know, my relationship with him was more distant than it might otherwise have been. That's because he invested it all in my mum. I probably should have addressed that before he passed, and I wish I had, but I didn't. I take it forward with my own children. So I make it a really important part of my life that I'm with my children. I do not want to be that bloke, and it usually is a bloke, who in 10 years says, I wish I'd spent more time with my children. If you want to spend more time with your children, spend more time with your children. So I still take them to their sports clubs. We're very, very strict about Friday nights staying in as a family. And most importantly of all, when I walk through the front door, the baggage is left there, I'm dad. And I'm their dad, and most of the time that means that they can rib me about anything under the sun. You
talk about sort of pride in people have for their children. How do you think your dad would feel if you do end up in number 10, if you saw it?
He would be proud. He really had difficulty expressing pride, particularly to his children. But as you may have read in the book that Tom Baldwin wrote, after he died, I found this folder of cuttings that he'd kept of all the things I'd ever achieved. He had a book of cuttings which he'd hidden in the back of a cupboard, but he'd cut them out, he'd kept them. I didn't know that. I wish I had known that, so he would be proud, in the way that I'm proud of my own children.
You've been really honest in this interview, and I really appreciate that honesty. So I wonder if there's one more question I could get an honest answer to as well. Last week's budget made it very clear that from next year, we're going to see some really savage cuts to public spending. Really savage cuts. And I feel that you haven't really been honest with the British people yet about what you're going to do about that. You know, Are you going to tax more, borrow more, or you're going to become, the austerity Prime Minister?
Well,
what are you going to do?
Let's be honest about what we're going to inherit, because I think it starts there. Because what we learned last week was a terrible indictment on 14 years in power. 14 years of Tory government.
Look, I haven't got long, so I just want to know. We know how bad it is. We know how bad it is. I want you to be honest with people. What are you going to do? Are you going to become the austerity Prime Minister if you win the election?
It'd be an awful inheritance if we're privileged enough to come into power. They've damaged the economy, they've damaged our public services, and we have to change that. I ran a public service, so I don't need anybody to tell me how important it is that our public services are properly supported and properly funded. We have to ensure that we've got an economy that is thriving, because at the bottom of all of this is the fact the economy's been stagnant for 14 years.
I know you want to grow the economy, but that's not going to happen on day one. I want Sheffield Wednesday to win the Premier League. I know it's not going to happen this season.
But there's a lot of things we can do very quickly. Changing the planning regulations and rules can be done very, very quickly.
Councils are going bust.
National Wealth Fund.
Councils are going bust now.
Yes.
There's a 5.5-year, and I know you'll care about this, there's a 5.5-year average wait from a rape being committed to that person seeing justice. What are you going to do straight away if you're in number 10? Be honest. Are you going to borrow more, or are you going to enact austerity?
Well, where we are going to be able to put money into our public services, we've been clear that we'll do that. So when it comes to the NHS, 2 million reduction in the waiting lists by the scheme that we've got to work 24/7. With our schools,
I'm not talking
getting
about
rid
the initial,
of VAT so we can put more teachers into our schools,
£1.7 billion
desperately needed.
IFS is £20 billion in public services, and you're not being honest about what you're going to do. This is your chance. Tell people.
We need to ensure that the economy is growing. We can turn
It's
that
not
around.
going to happen on day one.
Please, just hear me out before telling me it's not. Planning can be changed very, very quickly. That will have a massive impact on growth. The second thing is our National Wealth Fund, which will bring in private investment. I talk to private investors all of the time, and they say to me, Keir, we've got the money to invest right now in your country, but we're not going to do that because we don't see the stability. We don't see the conditions in which we're going to invest. We intend to turn that around. But I'm not going to shy away from your question. We are going to inherit a really badly damaged economy after 14 years of failure. Our job is to pick it up, stand it back up, and move our country forward. And I'm not going to shy away from that or provide easy answers to that.
Or not any answers.
We've got to grow our economy. Now, you may say that's not an answer you like. I say it's the only answer.
It's a long-term answer, but it's not telling me what you're going to do.
Well, I don't think that it is going to take that long to get our economy going. I think we can turn it around very, very quickly. But what I'm not going to do is make the mistake of saying that, or pretending there are easy answers, unfunded spending commitments are what Liz Truss installed on the country, and we're all paying the price. Last week you saw in that budget, at the very end, staggeringly, the Chancellor announced £46 billion of an unfunded commitment to get rid of national insurance. We're not going to make that mistake because in the end, who pays the price for that? It's working people, and I'm not going to allow that to happen under a Labour government.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
My interview there with Keir Starmer. Well, listening to that was Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam, often I think when I've interviewed Keir Starmer previously, I have found it quite hard to get under his skin. This time it was a bit different. He was very open. And I'll be honest, I found it quite moving to listen to him talking about his relationship with his father in particular.
Oh, it really was. We knew the story because it's just come out in a biography of Keir Starmer and his father, the emotionally distant father who cared for the wife and not for the son. But to hear him tell that story on camera, I mean, I don't know whether you saw, Sophie, I saw him swallow twice. Listen to the way he uses words. He puts it in the third person and depersonalises it in the way he uses his language. He knew, as a politician, he had to perform that, and he had to perform and convince people. But also it clearly hurts. And there was that moment, I thought, through that interview, that you saw something that you don't often see with Keir Starmer. Yeah, I think that's it. He was very honest in that answer. I found it harder, actually, if I'm being honest, to get a straight answer to him about what he would do if he did win the election. They wouldn't talk about growth, but, I mean, is that realistic? I mean, you put to him the central question for Labour, which is, what are you going to do when there's no money left? And his answer is wanting. He says that we can have growth, and we can have growth quickly because of planning, changes that they're going to do, and because of some investments in green stuff. Now, if you change the planning rules, buildings need to be built, people need to use them before the tax revenue arrives and growth actually helps you be able to deliver public services. That is a slow process. In 2025, Sophie, which is next year, there will be at least one budget, probably an autumn statement, and probably a spending review that determines how the path of public spending is going to go over the next 3 or 4 years. And they've got to know where the money's coming from then, when at the moment public services funding is going to rise by less than it was a week ago, and you've got all of these different big bills left over from the Tory government, things like compensation schemes and the rest. There was no answer in that interview. That's why he says he talks to investors. I talk to investors too. They're worried about what tax rises might come along. They're currently worrying about windfall taxes, which might be a hidden Labour answer to what's happening, because they can't work out how to make it all fit. He doesn't say how he can make it all fit. It is not true. It is not true to say that you can have the amount of growth that he wants in the first 6 months to a year of government. That's the period that will determine what a Labour government, should we have one, is like.
Yeah, and as you say, there's probably not much disagreement about the economic inheritance and the difficulty of the task ahead, but perhaps a bit of pitch rolling now might be a good idea to prepare people for that. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, analysis from our Deputy Political Editor. So what was really interesting about today is that, as well as the interview that you just saw, very wide-ranging interview, I also got to spend a lot of time today with Keir Starmer during that school visit. And as I said there, you know, he can feel a bit unknowable, but I did get the chance today that I think you'll see here to get a different sense of him. A visit to the swing constituency of Harley and a primary school to talk about how to give state school kids more confidence. Expect the rhythm of photo ops like these to speed up in this election year.
And you're reading from here?
Yeah.
And so that gives you what? Semi-quavers there? What I was watching for was the eye contact with the teacher and the way they had to play in a team together, because for me, there's the enjoyment of playing the music, and also the skills for life in here, for the job that they're going to do.
And did it bring back any memories of you at music at school?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, very much. I did a lot of music at school, and really, I mean, I love music, obviously, and did a lot of it. But it's more than just music. I mean, that's why I asked them how it made them feel, and they said happy. And it's just something else that is over and above the enjoyment of the music itself, which I think is crucially important.
Do you still play?
No. So don't throw me an instrument in me.
Not going to be picking up the xylophone off.
No, I thought somebody might say, well, here, you have a go.
Yeah.
But it was a big...
Managed to
I
dodge
mean,
that.
I've got a lifelong love of music as a result. I was
Yeah.
really struck
Yeah.
by how confident they were to just get in there and say what they thought. That is brilliant. It's a really, really good sign.
Starmer says he wants to level the playing field between state and private schools when it comes to the arts. So in the future, it's not just privately educated Christopher Nolan and Emily Blunt nominated for Oscars. But the challenge here, as everywhere across the public services, can you really deliver better outcomes without spending any more money?
What do you think Keir Starmer should do to help primary schools? If there's anything, because he might be Prime Minister, if there's anything that you could wave your magic wand and get him to do for primary schools?
If he was Prime Minister, can he shorten our weekdays?
Yeah.
So we only have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. So my mum and dad will let me stay up later.
Anything in particular that stood out to you from today, then?
The confidence of the children, I think, is hugely important. Even then, in the session we just had, questions and answers, they're confident in themselves, and if you ask a question back, they want to give you an answer. Now, that may seem like a small thing, but it's hugely important, I think.
Final question from me before I let you go. When's the election going to be?
Well, I hope it's going to be May the 2nd.
You hope, but when do you think it's going to be?
I think it should be. Whether the Prime Minister will actually call it for then or not, but he should.
Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Labour Minister, Caroline Flint, and the Conservative commentator and founder of Conservative Home, Tim Montgomerie. Great to have you both here with us. I did feel like we got a bit of a different side of Keir Starmer today. I don't know what you thought, Caroline.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's really difficult, and you could see that in the interview, maybe for the first time sharing in a public way something that is very personal, like his relationship with his father. And you could just see it in his body language. I'm sure there are people watching that's not something he necessarily feels comfortable with. And having to share that on a screen when he might not have shared how he felt about that with wider family and friends, it's difficult, but I think important too, because I think it gives you a sense of the sort of person he is, where he's come from, and what is his passion. He talked about spending more time with his children and not making the same mistakes. And I think, you know, that reveals a lot and it cuts through the political sort of dialogue that we so often hear to what people really want to hear about from who's going to possibly be the next Prime Minister.
I felt like I got more of an understanding of him somehow, on a kind of emotional level, if that makes sense. Because I think there is some... Because you're right, I think that he doesn't really want to talk about it. I think as kids, you know, we're often brought up to want to please our parents, so it kind of feel quite disloyal to be speaking ill, if you like, of your
Yes, definitely,
parents.
definitely. And yeah, I think lots of people that I've been through that myself, you know. Secrets you had from childhood, they were secret for a reason. And when you're in the public sphere, talking about some of those things the first time, especially because you don't want it to be seen as trying to capitalise on it, if that's the right word. And I don't think he is. But I think it's difficult and it is emotional, but it is important.
I thought you looked good in glasses. One of my first observations.
I said that before, and you said, no, he doesn't.
And I thought, you were right. You were right. You were right.
You stole your point, though. I saw that.
But overall, though, I was on your programme last Sophie when Tom Bold was here, and I almost choked up when he talked about that scrap. And so seeing Keir Starmer actually talk about it himself, I don't think it was in any way pre-manufactured. This was something that came very much from the heart. And you know, Keir Starmer's trouble is that, you know, he's taken so many different positions as a politician, you know, alongside Jeremy Corbyn, now as leader of the opposition. They're quite different. And people do wonder whether he's real. You know, is he just a politician who'll take any position? Actually, seeing him grounded a little bit in his family life, that making him more of a human being in the eyes of voters matters, I think. And he can't really deal with this sort of political shape-shifting that's going to be thrown at him by people like me until he's Prime Minister. Then we'll only really know who he is, and he will be Prime Minister. But with this personal stuff, at least we can identify there's something real and solid there. And I think that actually matters a lot in how voters will see him.
I still don't know what they're going to do after the election when it comes to taxes, spending, borrowing. And I'm not asking for like a full manifesto or specific tax rises, but I honestly just don't know.
And he completely dodged your question again. After that moment, you tried really hard to get that candid moment out of him, but he wasn't going to play. He wasn't going to play.
I think that's right, and it's going to get tougher on that the closer we get to the election because, you know, no matter the Labour Party's standing in the polls, which is looking very positive, and, you know, some of today's news probably they've enjoyed hearing about as well in terms of Lee Anderson, they will get asked more of these questions and the Conservatives will be piling it on to seek for answers. I mean, I think he's given himself, a bit like in '97, a little bit of breathing room because he said they're going to stay within the Conservative spending plans. He's already said that they're going to keep the national insurance reduction. And actually, this whole thing about mission-driven government is really code for saying focus on outcomes, not over-promise and under-deliver, focus on outcomes.
We'll have to have a look and see what happens next year. Thank you both very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, the former Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, defects to Reform, saying he did it because he wants his country back. How damaging is this to Rishi Sunak? We'll debate.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the former Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, has defected to Reform UK. It makes him the party's first MP, and he will take a seat in the Commons tomorrow morning. Mr Anderson was suspended by the Conservatives for refusing to apologise for saying the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is under the control of Islamists. He told a press conference that he'd joined Reform because he wanted his country back. Here's Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby.
After weeks of speculation, the day finally arrived.
I'm delighted to announce that I have found that champion of the Red Wall for Reform UK. Please welcome Mr Lee Anderson.
Three parties, Lee Anderson, from Labour councillor to Tory Red Wall MP, and now Reform's first member of Parliament.
I will start by saying I want my country back.
The rumours of a defection swirling ever since the outspoken MP for Ashfield was suspended by the Tories over Islamophobic comments made towards the London mayor.
We are giving up our streets to a minority of people who literally hate our way of life. We are allowing people into our country that will never integrate and adopt our British values.
Mr Anderson doubling down and refusing to apologise, but questions about whether he was letting down Conservative colleagues given short shrift.
What do you say to people that say the problem isn't all these parties, the problem is you, and this is all about attention seeking? What's your answer to them?
Country, constituency, and then party. Next question, please, Richard.
What? Sorry.
No, next question.
What do you say to your colleagues
I've given the answer, Beth.
who feel really let down this morning?
I've given my answer. Next question, please.
But what's your message to Mr Sunak?
We're going to move next. We're going down the...
He hasn't answered my question.
The defection a blow for the Conservatives, this man determined to press home the point.
The Tories are doomed. They are toxic, they're being punished in the polls, and they will be punished at the general election, and quite rightly so.
Home Secretary James Cleverly today at a fraud summit, Frank too. Mr Anderson's made a mistake.
I like him personally. I think he's made a real mistake. Because, as he has said in his own words, reform is not the answer.
But Labour say Tory divisions are damaging the country.
Another day, another story about Tory division. And, you know, I think the bigger picture here is now you've got a government that is so distracted, it's divided, it's arguing amongst itself.
Up in Mr Anderson's constituency of Ashfield, voters unimpressed by his flip-flopping.
Well, if that was voting for, he can't make up his own mind, can he?
You don't know your politics, so you just keep going around in circles. I don't know.
You just think, well, you know, Who are you for?
Ashfield, a red wall seat that turned Tory in 2019, was already a key election battleground that's now turned into a fight for the heart of the Conservative Party too.
Well, let's talk to Beth, shall we? Beth, I guess my question is, how seriously should we take this? Has Lee Anderson turned into, I guess, a bit of a sort of joke figure, if you like? 3 parties now he's been part of. Or actually, is he representative of something in the Red Wall that the Conservatives should be worried about?
OK, well, I think there's a few things going on today. The first thing I would say is the response from the government's been really interesting. They don't want to poke the hornet's nest. So what's happened is there's been like a sort of shrug almost. And when you talk to people inside government, they say things like, we're disappointed, it's with regret. One person inside Number 10 saying, look, ultimately politics is a team sport. And if you have a talented player, but who's been too disruptive to the team, then you've got to let them go. We're getting on with it. It's an election. So there's almost a whatever. But I think that betrays what actually is going on in terms of the nervousness. I think the thing it shows me is the battle lines for the Conservative Party and for the future of the party. And the reason I say that is that Rishi Sunak has for so long tried to contain the divisions in the party. And this is just a reminder that he is unable to contain divisions. And Tory MPs weren't all shouting about it today, but the New Conservatives put out a statement saying the party needs to urgently change course, and a few Conservative MPs retweeted that. So I think there is an issue there, and I think there's nervousness that Reform are edging up in the polls. And just finally, with Richard Tice, what was so interesting was the punishment line about the Conservatives. This was not a party that is going after Labour. It's all about the punishment on the Conservative Party. He was arguing they broke manifesto pledges. We are coming for them, and we are going to take the vote. And he is taking the fight to the Conservative Party, and that will make a lot of Conservative MPs in seats where their 2019 coalition with some of those Labour voters going to the Tories, they'll be looking at that and thinking, well, they're fed up with us, are they going to go to Reform? And I think it's going to create nervousness.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there. Well, let's talk to one of those Conservative MPs, shall we? We're joined now by the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, James Daly. What was your reaction? Was it a shrug, or were you a bit worried?
Well, I was really sad today. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for a long time. We've been through a lot together. And when you lose a friend in any circumstance... I hope he's still my friend.
He's still alive, by the way, don't worry.
I hope he's still my friend.
You're still in Parliament.
I hope he's still my friend at that point. I haven't spoken to him since this happened, but when you've shared a lot, when you've laughed a lot, when you've done lots of things together... He came up to my constituency, did 2 great events supporting me. I played very badly in his charity cricket match. These are relationships that go beyond just turning up and coming to, being in London and having the odd chat with each other.
You sound quite sad.
I am sad because, as I said, genuinely, so if I consider him a friend. I hope he considers me a friend. And we... the last conversation... Well, I won't say the last conversation, but it was talking again about me coming down in the summer to play, again, very badly in his charity cricket
But you still got to do, by the way. Now he's defected to Reform. What do you reckon?
I don't think so. Perhaps the invitation's not there, but I'm just very sad. When I listened to Lee today, I was just thinking to myself, what is it that has changed? What is it that's different? He was saying all these things, and a lot of colleagues we may disagree on certain things, certain incidents or certain things that happen, but that's no different to what Lee's been saying for 4 years.
So was it right the party suspended him then? Because he was suspended, wasn't he, for his comments about the Mayor of London?
But again, this is the thing that Lee said himself, that it was right that the Chief Whip took the whip away from him. He said it, not me. And so... If there was a sort of acceptance that... I think Lee has used the phrase, forgive me if I'm wrong, that his language... I think he may use clumsy words or words regarding his words, and has given an explanation in terms of what he meant. But, again, I was on a programme earlier on with Richard Tice, and it touches on the point about what Beth is talking about. But Richard Tice was asked about the words that led to the suspension. He seemed to be agreeing that those were unacceptable words. But this, what I genuinely feel this is about, is what Beth has just said, in that Ben Habib and other leading figures have said this is about destroying the Conservative Party. And so what surprised me most of all and saddens me most of all, is that Lee has said previously that a vote for reform is a vote for Keir Starmer. And Lee and others, perhaps in reform, are quite happy to have 5 years of socialism, which I will fight with every bone in my body, whether I've got 105 majority or not. And that's what I don't... But that's what I don't understand. You know, when we talk about majorities, I know it is important that you talk about the national swings of the mood music and the decision the government are making. But there are some MPs, and trust me that you and your voters talk about this, who are here because they believe in what their party stands for and want to take on Labour, which Lee doesn't, apparently.
But it's interesting, isn't it, though, because, you know, you talk very fondly of him.
Yeah.
You've obviously had shared experiences. You're both in kind of red wall seats, if I can put it like that. He's saying, I know from my mailbag how many people in this country support Reform UK and what they have to say. And you know, that is reflected in some of the polling, you know, double-digit leads, double-digit polling for reform. Do you understand some of the reasons that Lee...
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. Forgive me.
Do you understand some of the reasons that Lee Anderson feels his voters and himself are attracted by what reform saying?
Well, people will be attracted by different messages, but what I don't quite understand is if that's the height of what Lee's saying, that people like reform. Well, people like all sorts of different parties, you know. Go and join whoever you want in respect. If you are swayed by what your postbag says, and that's what's going to influence the choices you make and the decisions you make, I think that Lee, I mean, I may be wrong with it, but Lee used to tell me and he used to be proud of this, the amount of money that the Conservative government has invested in Ashfield, whether that's new schools and the other infrastructure, that's down to a Conservative government. Changing people's lives in Ashfield, you know, creating more job opportunities over 14 years. That seems to be ignored on the basis of what you've just told me, that people are writing into him and saying that they back reform. And seemingly, he can... I don't know what it is. Is he saying he wants the freedom of speech to say things that he's already been saying in the Conservative Party? I don't quite understand it. But that might be just a friend talking more than anything else, because I think he's a talented guy. He's brought money into Ashfield. I think he's a good constituency MP. But for him to effectively campaign on behalf of Keir Starmer by joining the Reform Party, that's not the Lee I know.
It's probably not how he would see it. Thank you very much indeed, James Daly there. Thank you very much. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Just where does this leave the Conservatives? We'll get reaction from our guests, Caroline Flint and Tim Montgomerie. That's next. Hello, welcome back. Well, let's bring in Caroline and Tim again, shall we? Lee Anderson, right. Tim, how seriously should we be taking this?
Well, I think the Conservative Party has to take reform incredibly seriously. Whether they take Lee Anderson seriously, I don't know. Caroline doesn't agree with me on this. We were talking about it before in the green room. I think there is a problem partly of the Tories' own making. I think it would have been an appropriate, proportionate response for Rishi Sunak to have reprimanded him for those remarks he made about Sadiq Khan. But withdrawing the whip, I think, almost inevitably, and I tweeted this at the time, meant that he would become Reform's first MP. And I think Downing Street could have handled this a little bit better. Now Reform will have their first representative in Parliament. We'll have George Galloway, we'll have Lee Anderson, both sort of representing these two insurgent parties in the House of Commons, one eating at Labour's flank, one eating at the Tory flank. And, there'll be a bit of rivalry between those two. But fundamentally, Reform was always going to be a problem, and Reform will devastate the Tories if Nigel Farage stands for it. I think this is a little twist of the knife into the Tory side, but it's Nigel Farage that the Tory party is really waiting to find out what he does.
What's your take?
I think it's a car crash waiting to happen for the Conservative Party, and I think his comments about Sadiq Khan were not clumsy. You've used that phrase before, and I disagreed with you on that. We heard it tonight from James Daly as well. I think it was very calculated, his choice of language about Sadiq and this idea that he was controlled by Islamists. I think it was racist. I think it was I think it was Islamophobic. So I think it's very calculated. I think he's been, looking for a way out. I mean, I was looking at some stats for when he won in Ashfield in 2019. Interestingly, an independent came second to him with, I think, double-figure 1,000 votes. Brexit got around 2,000. I think Labour was third. He might think, I'm not sure he's right, that he's got an odds-on chance to hold it in Ashfield. But the truth is, whatever happens, he's got the support of Reform UK. What he has created is even more pressure for the Conservative government with a resurgent Labour Party and obviously doing positively in the polls, and now a rising Reform UK as we enter into this last period before a general election. So, yeah, I think, he was a car crash waiting to happen for the Conservatives.
I should probably reflect on Lee Anderson's own comments about what he said about Sadiq Khan, saying that his language was clumsy, but he was trying to express the view that he'd lost control of London. That's Lee Anderson's view. People will disagree with it or not. Tim, you were saying that Reform are a problem for the Conservative Party. Do you see any more defections, or do you think that this is just an isolated case? I mean, it's a third party now that Lee Anderson's been part of. Yeah.
I think there's an awful lot of... Reform do have money at the moment, and they're doing quite a lot of private polling. And I think if there is polling that they can show in the next few days that shows that somehow Lee Anderson is in a better position now as a Reform candidate than he was as a Conservative candidate, they are talking, apparently, and I have sources to suggest that they are right in saying that, they're honest in saying that. They are talking to a number of Conservative MPs. If they can show in that opinion polling that actually this has boosted Lee Anderson, that might make some of these Tory MPs join Lee Anderson in the Reform camp. And it will be that, I'm afraid. It's not high principle, it's, Tory MPs looking after their own interests in whether they will move. But Reform, that's what Reform are doing.
The other thing, Caroline, I wonder, is that we always talk about Lee Anderson as being red wall, classic red wall. Are they losing touch with the red wall? Is the red wall crumbling? We shouldn't just assume that everyone in the red wall votes for Reform and loves Lee Anderson.
No, not at all, not at all. It's what, I've said it before, and I said it when I was still an MP. Lots of people on the issue of Europe did not necessarily see themselves attached to the Brexit Party or the Reform Party as it's become. They just felt that we shouldn't be in the European Union, and that was something not unusual for Labour voters if you look back to the 70s and the 60s. And it's wrong to pile everyone in together. I remember when UKIP at one point were trying to adopt more left-wing views. For example, I think they were going to have a tax on luxury goods. I think it was called the handbag tax. Yeah. And you could see how they were trying to be both pretty right on certain things, but actually economic more left on other areas.
The British people are
and lots of people, I think lots of working class people think we should have good law and order. you play by the rules, you deal with things in a straight way, but they also feel that the state is there also to provide a decent education, decent health, and create jobs for people.
It is quite interesting that, as you say, like Reform, or UKIP as it was, the previous kind of incarnation, if you like, going for Labour, but now it does feel like they're really laser focused on the Conservatives.
And you could see from the Vox box there as well, Sophie, that, you know, this is a guy who was a Labour councillor, worked for a Labour MP, joined the Tories, and now he's joined Reform UK. People are very sceptical about people jumping from one party to another.
Thank you both very much indeed. Well, Mr Anderson's Defection is sure to feature heavily in tomorrow's newspapers. We're going to have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and The Guardian's political correspondent, Alita Adu. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, you cannot have missed the row over the rejigged royal photo, but the palace aren't the only ones at it. After the break, we're looking at the politics of photoshopping.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, the Princess of Wales takes the blame for editing the Mother's Day photo that raised more questions than it answered. The image of Kate and her 3 children was pulled by international picture agencies last night, with the Princess confirming today that it had been manipulated. We'll be discussing public trust in the royal family, who, in trying to see off conspiracy theories about the Princess of Wales, have actually fuelled further speculation. That and much more in the UK Tonight at 8.
I lost my son 18 years ago. He died when he was 5 weeks old. He contracted meningitis. And as you can imagine, my grief in those early days was all-encompassing. And what happened over the years is that you don't get better from grief, but you learn to live in a different way. You learn to cope with it. And I realised a few years ago that I had moved to a point where actually I was no longer just surviving, but thriving. And because I'm a writer, what I wanted to do was to write about that. I wanted to open up the discussion about grief. I think it's something that, particularly in this country, we're not particularly good at. So I wrote my book, I Promise It Won't Always Hurt Like This. I've looked at grief in my fiction, and I think I thought I was quite good at processing my emotions as I wrote about it, but when you're writing using fictional characters, there's a sort of layer of protection. When you're writing a memoir, you owe it to your reader to be completely honest about your feelings, and that means all the ugly bits of grief. You know, grief isn't just crying into a starched handkerchief. It's the anger and the bitterness and the envy of other people's happiness. It's a really complex, long-lasting condition. Loss is universal, but grief is really unique to each person and unique to your individual grief. I lost my father shortly after my son died, and the way that I grieved for my father was totally different. I thought I knew grief, but actually it hit me in a completely different way. There are commonalities, though, from, I've spoken to lots of people who have lost loved ones, and we all agree that there are elements of being very angry, certainly insomnia, or perhaps the opposite, needing to sleep all the time. So there are sort of common threads, I think, among people who are grieving. The promise that it won't always hurt like this, that however dark the days feel in the early trenches of grief, that there are better times ahead.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, it was meant to calm the conspiracy theories about the Princess of Wales. That photo of Kate and the kids released for Mother's Day, and then an order from news agencies not to run the image because it was manipulated. Cue the internet exploding, and in case you're wondering, the Politics Hub team consensus, bit weird, but probably just a PR fail. After all, photoshopping is nothing new. Politicians have been doing it for years. So we thought we'd play a little game.
I haven't.
Apart from, sorry, Caroline, there's fair. Some politicians. We thought we'd play a little game of Spot the Difference. Here we go. Grant Shapps, as Business Secretary, tweeted this photo of him meeting the UK space mission. But someone else was there. Who was it?
Oh, my goodness me.
Erased from the photo, Boris Johnson. And then what about this photo of David Cameron, then Prime Minister, on his Facebook page? But then number 10 invited ridicule by digitally adding that poppy to it. An hour later, Downing Street deleted the picture and replaced it with one of the PM actually wearing a poppy. It was too late, though. Social media spotted the change. It was all over. What is going on?
Well, that Grant Shapps is on a par with Stalin. Stalin, literally, I mean, the Russians are brilliant at this. I mean, they just remove people. In fact, he inserted himself into a photograph in 1922 with Lenin, who had a terrible illness and died not particularly long afterwards, because he wanted to be seen as an ally and bolster his chances of succeeding Lenin. But, I mean, these things come back to bite you. You don't get away with it.
No, you
and we're being quite jokey about this, and it is funny. But actually, there are so many conspiracy theories about politics at the moment. People are very cynical and suspicious about politicians at the moment. When these sorts of things happen, whether it's a royal family or... they actually... People think, I told you, you can't take them at face value. So it's really quite corrosive for public trust.
We can't moan about AI and then be in a society where news organisations are publishing digitally altered photos. I mean, it's just not acceptable.
Just to be balanced as well, James Purnell had a problem with this back in 2007 because he turned up late for a constituency event with other MPs in his local hospital.
Oh, that's
They
right,
took the photo, and then I think the hospital put his face into the photo afterwards, and he was Secretary of State for Culture and was apparently having a go at the press at the time for, false reporting and things like this, So just to be balanced.
We're out of time. Very balanced, as always, on the Politics Hub. That is it from us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it's the UK Tonight.